Actually, I'm a physical chemist. So, I grew up in Germany, actually very nearby Düsseldorf, close to the Dutch border, actually. And I got a PhD in Munich in chemistry. And I taught physical chemistry, University of Arkansas, for 43 years. And then I retired last year. So I worked with electron diffraction. We developed a special technique, time-resolved electron diffraction. And we did quantum chemical calculations of molecular structures. So all my life I've been a scientist and wrote hundreds of technical papers. And I developed a class on these topics for students to understand. Students, I noticed they could do the technical details of quantum chemistry, but they didn't understand what they were doing. So, technically they were perfect, including the mathematics and all that, but they didn't understand. So I developed a class on these topics. It was called Quantum Reality and the Spiritual Quest. Over decades, first together with some other people, and then I kept it going. And it was general, it was for people in the arts, students, in history, in anywhere, but also chemists and physicists took it. And many of them said for the first time they began to understand what they have been doing. So, you can use the technique without really understanding. Science has to do with who we are, our understanding. I mean, the main example is Darwin. Darwin entered into biology in the materialism of Newton. In this classical worldview, only material particles exist. Only they are real. Their properties determine everything. We are machines. We are also, according to Darwin, accidental machines. We're kind of diced together pieces of stuff. We have no meaning. We're just machines. And in this classical world, everything is predictable. The future state of the universe depends on the current state. The current state depends on the past states. There's no creativity. There's nothing unexpectable in principle. Everything is boring, no creativity. And so you see how the view of the world of science affects the view of ourselves. You can also see that this view to look at things is in error because we know we can be creative. We know we can do unpredictable things. So that doesn't fit. To see how the arrival or the discovery of quantum phenomena changed these things, we have to focus maybe on 2 or 3 basic properties. One is that the basis of material things is not material. It's not like Newton thought elementary particles are eternal. They are not. Why do I say that? Well, if you have isolated particles or atoms, molecules, particles in a vacuum where there are not many interactions, they spontaneously undergo transitions into wave states. I shouldn't say particles, I should say basic entities or units of reality for which we have no name. Basic entities, when we interact with them, they appear as particles. When we don't interact with them, the particles vanish and become waves. So, how do we know? These waves, they spread in space. When they hit a double slit, you have heard this so often, they create interference patterns. We don't see these interference patterns because these waves are not waves of the visible world. Why do I say it? Okay, here you have something that appears as an isolated particle. All of a sudden it has flown apart in some wave. The wave contains probabilities where to find the particle. Technically, it's what physicists call a potentiality state. Definition of a potentiality state is that a physical property doesn't have an actual value but many possible values. Like in this case, the particle doesn't have an actual position in space but many possible ones. If you don't have an actual position in space, you are not part of the empirical world. You can easily see, you and I, we are empirical things. We are always somewhere. Even though tomorrow when I leave, and you think of me, you don't know where I am, but you know that there is one point in the universe where my existence is 100%. That's where I am. Probability to find me is 100%. Zero everywhere else. We cannot be in a state where the probability to find you is 10% here and 10% at your home and 10% upstairs. We can't do that. No empirical, no visible thing can do that. So when you say, no, this is crazy. I just had a localized particle. It must be somewhere. So if you set up detectors in space, it pops out of somewhere, but you cannot predict where. And the same, the wave spreads out in space. When the wave hits two slits, it creates interference patterns. But you don't see those because the waves are not visible, but they are real. The example shows there is a part to the world, to reality. It is real, but you can't see it. It is non-empirical. It is transcendent. But why is it real? Because it can act on it. It can manifest itself in the empirical world and act on things. And so, the particle becomes that way. It's not a particle anymore. It has become a numerical pattern. That's Schrödinger's view of electrons in atoms. They are numerical patterns. The patterns don't have units of mass or energy, but they have power. Their interference determines what kind of molecules can form. The interference of the waves in molecules determines how they interact in your body and keep you alive. So they're not energy, they're not matter, but they have power. Forms, there is, so, physicists didn't look for all that. When these waves pass through a double slit, you have heard then there is interference pattern. You don't see the interference pattern. The interference pattern is in the transcendent, non-visible realm. But it provides probabilities where you can find an electron, if it was an electron. Some places the probability is high, and some it is zero, and some it is higher, and so on. You don't see that except when you set up a sequence of detectors, like, multi-channel devices. They have lots of detectors in a small area. It pops out in one of them. The interference pattern is visible in the impacts of, repeated impacts of many, because it shows you in some areas more particles come than in others. That shows you the interference. But there's a lot of misunderstanding. People say, yeah, scientists are not saints, you know. The pioneers are not saints. They can make mistakes. Niels Bohr made mistakes big time. Like, you know, one of his ideas, when we interact with the world, it tells us nothing what the world is like. If you take an instrument that is sensitive to particles, you see particles. You take an instrument sensitive to waves, you see waves. No, you see only particles. You don't see the waves ever. You try to see the waves, they snap together to a particle. That has to do with waves in atoms and molecules. In other words, like I said already, the electrons in atoms are waveforms. Then some people say, well, they mean nothing. They're just rationalizing our understanding. No, they are real. And for occupied states, you can image them. You can image them with short laser pulses and so on. There are special techniques. What came out in nature now may be a new aspect, but the fact isn't new. 15, 20 years ago, British scientist C.N. Villars, he already said these potentiality waves aren't just guiding elementary particles. No, elementary particles are potentiality waves. They become these waves. But, you know, he doesn't belong to some big group, some pressure group, so people don't have to quote him. And then somebody finally thinks, oh, maybe it's not a bad idea, and does it. Oh, and then it's a great discovery. So
it's nothing really new.
It's not really new. But, you know, the things are unexpected. But really they are simple. So the waves in atoms and molecules, the electrons are like that. Now, you can think of a molecule like, you know, it has like a mountain range, lots of valleys and hills. The valleys are energy holes. They're all filled with some ladder of energies, quantized energy, the quantum states. Each state has a wave function that determines its physical properties. Are these wave functions real? Yes, I say they are real. I don't know whether it's my idea. I should say it's my idea, but it occurred to me they are real because they control empirical phenomena. A molecule has practically infinitely many of these states. It has to stand on one of them, and then the others are empty. When they are empty, you can't see them because there is nothing there. You can only see a state that is occupied. But these states and their forms exist in the system. They are part of the logical structure of a system. So they are not nothing. And, you know, quantum chemists call these empty states virtual states. They are real. Why? Because their specific forms can affect empirical processes. The empty states of atoms, for example, in many molecules, many reactions, determine what kind of molecules can form. You know, I mentioned you can breathe oxygen and it helps your metabolism. Nitrogen doesn't do that because oxygen has invisible degenerate states. And in spectroscopy, we observe transitions a molecular atom makes between a step where it is on and a higher lying step when it absorbs energy. many of these transitions are possible because there are countless states, but they are not equally likely. It is that some transitions are more easy to a system than others. The likelihood, is observed as an intensity in the spectrum. When the absorption is intense, the transition is likely. When it is less intense, it's unlikely, or sometimes it's forbidden. What determines the probabilities? The wave functions of the empty states. The empty states guide an empirical process. They must exist. There's no other way to think of it. So you can also, this is kind of cute. You can look at it and say, molecules do these things. They're guided by these waveforms, like by inner images. That's of course a psychological concept. We are guided by inner images. So there is a congruence of physical and mental. Molecules do nothing without the permission of their inner images. We do nothing without the permission of our inner images. Even when you want to take a step, first you have to activate, your brain has to act an image what it means to make a step. Excuse me.
Yes, yeah.
So, that's why I said, tongue-in-cheek, quantum physics is the psychology of the universe. Okay, you want to ask?
Continue.
Okay, so where does it lead us to something mental and non-dual and so on? Think about elementary particles become these waves and they flow apart. Well, we don't really see them, we think they are waves, but when there are waves, it's like in an ocean. The waves hang together. When you fly across the Atlantic, you can sometimes, look down if the weather is nice. Look down on the ocean and you see white crests. And then you can see how they move about and they vanish and there are new ones coming. You know what it is. There must be some big waves down there. And they have white tops. So they look like individual, independent things, but they are not. They're all hanging together in the same ocean. And so when you say, okay, the waves, they flow apart, so the background of the universe is like an ocean of waves. They're hanging together. That's where the idea of wholeness comes into play. So all things are connected in this wholeness. In other words, your body and mine and that chair and your house is stupid. No, they are like the crests on top of the waves. They look independent when you look down at them, but they are the crests of an invisible ocean. They are not hanging together in their material being, but in their transcendent roots. I think that's how you could look at it, and this is how the idea of connectedness comes in. Other aspects. So you have this realm of forms, non-empirical, invisible, non-material, and then you have the empirical material reality. What are these forms? How does the idea of consciousness come in? I've said it often before, it didn't happen, physicists weren't looking for it. It didn't happen because somebody got a telephone call some morning and a friendly voice said, "This is your cosmic consciousness calling, how are you doing?" But there were subtle suggestions, like probability waves. That's an innocent concept. probability waves are information. And someday somebody looks at it and says, information? For whom? For what? For what? Is that mind? No, it's stupid. Forget about it. So, they're potentiality waves. Someday you realize our thoughts are forms of potentiality. They're a very good example for what that means. Your thoughts are real. My thoughts, I know my thoughts are real. You don't see them because they're not empirical. They are entities of potentiality because they can come out. If I decide, I tell you, and then it's an empirical thing. Or they don't come out. I could stop right now. No, you would not be happy. So, so you see, someone says thoughts have the nature of potentiality. Here's a realm of potentiality waves. Are they thought-like? There's a cosmic field of potentiality waves. Cosmic consciousness? No. I say that, I'm out. It's crazy. You see how people got kind of nudged into this direction, thinking about it more and more often. Actually, this idea is very interesting. All these ideas that come out in quantum physics appear somewhere in our spiritual history. That particular thought about potentiality of thought goes back to St. Augustine. He was talking to people, and all of a sudden he realized, he said, I came here, I thought what I wanted to tell you is really weird. You are from Rome, I have to talk to you in Latin. If you were from Greece, I would have to talk to you in Greek. But the thought in me is not in Latin or Greek, it's different. It's weird. Yes, it's different because it's non-empirical. It's an invisible thing. It's not a thing. So, okay, the wholeness, the waves, if there are waves, they flow apart, they make it. In the ocean, you don't have bubbles of water, like little balls. No, you have a contiguous whole. If there is this wholeness in the background of the universe, all empirical structures are actualizations of forms in it. You are. Ultimately, all the particles in you are actualizations. You are. I am. Maybe he is too. I'm not sure. So, if it's a wholeness, everything comes out of it. Also our consciousness. If it comes out of it, it belongs to it. So consciousness must be a cosmic property. If reality is non-dual, consciousness must be cosmic. You could say, we are not aliens in this world. Classical biology says, Jacques Monod, this French biochemist who got the Nobel Prize sometimes, I think in the 50s or 60s, he said, we live like aliens, like gypsies at the edge of a world that doesn't care for our needs or thoughts or our crimes. We are aliens. No, we are not aliens. If reality is a wholeness, we are part of it. And we talked about already earlier, there's no room for mind in classical physics, in the classical sciences. No, today, in the quantum world, we can say, you have a body and a mind because the universe has a body and a mind. It's, using symbols, what do I mean? The body would be material things. The mind is the realm of forms, to which perhaps consciousness belongs. So there's something else that is important. The forms in the cosmic realm, they are a medium of potentiality. Things can come out. They don't have to. And actually, they don't come out in a causal way. It's like when the particle is spread out in this potentiality wave, it will pop out somewhere, but you cannot predict where. So you can say that the empirical world is ruled by causality. The transcendent world is not, which means the transcendent world can be creative. The empirical world cannot be creative, it's just lawful. It's a machine. The realm of potentiality can be creative. New things can come out. It has a potential. And you know, it may be our function. We have a potential. You probably heard of Abraham Maslow, the psychiatrist.
Yes, yes.
You know, we have this system of needs, and they're basic, like physical and safety and love needs and so on. When they're all satisfied, there's still one, the need to actualize our potential. It's a wonderful discovery. He discovered it when physics discovers that the universe has a realm of potentiality. And I think that our potential is part of the cosmic potential. It has to be if everything is wholeness. And actually, you know, the book that I'm finishing, its title is Infinite Potential. So it will come out next spring. Excuse me, so our potential, it needs to come out. It's like, it's a cosmic need. You know, if I use Abraham Maslow, if you don't actualize your potential, you get unhappy, restless. It may be our function in this world, because the universe can actualize in us in ways that it cannot do anywhere else. Why it wants to do that, I have no idea, of course. But it looks to me so. Basis is non-duality. It's wholeness. We have a cosmic function. This is our dignity. As pieces of trash, we have no dignity. We can just go ahead and bite each other all the time and be the fittest, you know? Right, these forms in the realm of potentiality are empty of matter or energy. If he means full means as mass, then it's the same thing. It depends how you define emptiness. Probably he meant that. Which is another example that, you know, ancient sages, philosophers had these ideas. You know, Schrödinger's wave functions are numbers. The electrons in atoms are numbers. Pythagoras says all things are numbers. Big deal. They were inspired. Aristotle invented the concept of potentiality. He said there are three modes of being: really being, not being, and potentially being. So, you know, these things have been there, but then came classical physics and Renaissance and said, oh, these guys didn't know what they were talking about. We know better. And of course, there were benefits, you know, technological and so on. But there was a price to pay, because it closed our mind to many things. I guess your question is, if particles or units of reality are spontaneously waves, how come there are some real enduring things? Your body is enduring. The answer is very simple. Molecules, elementary particles, atoms do that when they don't interact with anything. All the atoms and molecules in your body are constantly interacting. It's like, not really, but they're watching each other. Don't you do it, just stay here, you know. Like, they're interacting, and they keep themselves localized and empirical. That's why things endure. If you would take one atom after another out of this thing and put it in a vacuum, it would become a wave. But of course, then it's gone. Is that help?
That's beautiful. Beautiful.
It's all so simple that you have to wonder, why do people not learn this? And why don't they teach it? I know prominent physicists, I will not name them, will say, no, the wave functions are not real. What it is, it's just a matter of calculating. Well, if it's not real, how can it affect visible phenomena? It's so simple. You hear so many things, you know, like wave-particle duality. There is no duality. They're either particles or waves. They're not mixed together. Or people say the particle went through both ways in a slit. No, no particle is going through the slit. Waves are coming through the slit. If you watch where a particle goes, it will appear in one of the two slits. But then there is no interference because you made a particle, there's no interference, there is no wave state anymore going through the slits. So there are so many misleading formulations that, and it is so simple that I'm amazed. And you know, you hear it again and again, so we'll see. Well, now you're making a leap into something that may be possible or not. No, you see, the self or the mind, I mean, these are very difficult things to begin with. Secondly, the mind-like in the universe is primary. The matter is secondary. So if you apply that to us, you might say our mind is primary, or maybe I should say our soul, you know, the part of our mind that is connected. But of course, I understand if you smash my brain, my mind is gone, except you don't know. We don't know what is left, you know. So I would say to your question, we have to be careful not to put too many details into that, at least at this point, right? There is a basis that is very sound. There's some non-empirical, non-material, mind-like, perhaps a cosmic consciousness. So it makes sense, this idea that the consciousness in us is really not ours. So it's Hegel, it's the Indian sages. I mentioned in my lecture, you know, Hegel already said, spirit is all. Everything is out of spirit. And the cosmic, your thinking is not yours, it's the thinking of the cosmic spirit. The Indian sages had this symbol of water pots. Take 1 million pots filled with water, put it out in the sun. The sun is in each one of them, but there's only one sun. Take 1 million people, they're all conscious. There's only one consciousness. And I mentioned yesterday in my lecture, you know, words tell us something. What does the word conscious tell us? Where does it come from? It comes from two Latin words. Con means together, and scientia, state of knowledge, means knowing together. You've often used, let's say, I'm conscious, and you were saying, I'm knowing this together with what? With whom? Why did you say that? You used the word. Words are not accidental. And recently, I was so fortunate that Deepak Chopra interviewed me on his blog radio, and he mentioned that consciousness has no plural. It's the same. We speak of our consciousness. Why don't we say our consciousnesses? If it's mine, it's not yours. But we don't. So, and you know, words are not accidental. They contain information. They are there for a reason. Like, there was some insight, and then we lost it, but it's still in this word. Science is so important. First of all, if you think, you know, matter is everything. So then it applies to biology. And then you get the idea, primary virtues are aggression and selfishness. That had consequences. In the United States, neo-Darwinists, they love to discuss with religious fundamentalists, because those poor guys, oh my God, I mean, they're lost before they start. You know, you cannot defend these views. What they should discuss is how Darwin was like a late excuse for colonialism. You can go out in the world and do that, you should do it. I'm the fittest. It's a late excuse for early British capitalism. If you can enslave half of the country and you make money this way, go ahead, do it. So you see, then in modern times, 100 years after Darwin, the view that our morality is shaped by this. The view that there are no moral principles. It's the view, Michael Ruse and E.O. Wilson from Harvard University, they say, morality is an illusion fobbed off on us by our genes to make us good cooperators. In other words, there are no moral principles. Then you don't have to be amazed what is happening in this world that's now dualistic. Every day, killings, violence, wars, religious wars, abuse of women, return of slavery. Oh, don't worry about it. It's part of the game. It's part of the Darwinian game. So, you know, the coherence of all expresses itself in the fact that the same aspects of reality find awareness at the same time. When physics is discovering the wholeness in the physical world, our world is globalizing, discovers we are one. So we cannot go on living with Darwinian aggression and selfishness. We cannot go on living with Newtonian materialism. We have to change. We have to change to a new state of new structure of consciousness. And this was the topic of my lecture yesterday. The aspects of the quantum world, they are so unexpected and they're so, in a way, weird that the average Western mind, they cannot accept that, including, you know, the most educated people. We need, it's like in the discovery of these phenomena, our mind is making a mutation, undergoing a mutation, like the evolution is jumping into a new human species. If you listen to people here in various, it's a new structure of consciousness coming to the fore. That has happened before. There is a not so well-known German philosopher of the last century, Jean Gebser. He has described very convincingly how our consciousness evolved from one structure to the next, like from the archaic structure to magic, to a mythical, and then one he called mental, the structure of classical science. And now he says we are undergoing another mutation to the integrative. Integrative is non-dual. Characteristic of integrative structure is it can reconcile seemingly contradictory terms. It can see the truth in previous structures. The scientific mind couldn't see any truth in. They said they were all stupid, they didn't know what they're talking about. Now we can have, for example, a spiritual view of the world and a rational view, and they're not in conflict. You couldn't do that in the age of Newtonian science. Even though Newton was a Christian, but he was not logically consistent. In 1900, you couldn't believe in science, have a faith, religious faith, and be logically consistent. It's not possible. Today you can be it. Today we can be individuals and part of a wholeness. We can support each other and profit from it. And so, you know, at a time when the world is growing together, that is a very important development. There's a problem. Individual organisms repeat in their development the development of a species. So, you know, an embryo goes through all these different life forms. This way our body forms, and it's an automatic process. I guess, you know, there's this term, it says, ontogenesis, the generation of an individual, is a recapitulation of the genesis of the species. So our body evolves that way automatically. Now, with our mind, we have to do the same thing. We have to go from a magic to archaic to magic, mythical, and so on. But we have control where we will stop. You have to look at people with these different mindsets, really speaking crudely, like different animals. They are different beings, and they cannot live together because some think they have it right. So it shows, you know, how important it is to support education. Everybody should get to the highest level, and the highest level is insight into non-duality, into wholeness. It goes into everything. It goes into our morality. The classical system was very consistent. David Hume, you know, who lived at this time, he said, he had this famous is-ought paradox. It says, what is and is not the case cannot tell you what you ought and ought not to do. If you think there is some connection, you're making a big mistake. And, well, it's not true. It's also in error. Excuse me. Because the conclusion of selfishness and aggression is exactly the conclusion of a dual world. In a world that is wholeness, that is non-dual, there are certain modes of behavior that you should follow. In such a world, you shouldn't cheat, you shouldn't hurt someone, you cheat yourself. Many people think that if they are smart and cheat someone, they get a lot of money and they get very happy. Yes, they get a lot of money, they will not be happy. I've known many people in my life who got really, really very wealthy by doing very aggressive things. They got very unhappy in their later life. So this is karma. There is a connection between our understanding of the world and how we should live. We live to actualize the potential in us. It's infinite because it's cosmic. It's not just personal, it's more than personal. And it's one of the most, well, the most important thing that we can do in our life to actualize it. And most people haven't even heard of it and certainly don't know that it is important. If you ask people, what do you want to do in life? I've often asked students, they typically say, oh, I like to make a lot of money. Okay, there's nothing wrong with it. I say, fine. Then when you have the money, what are you going to do? Well, then I'm going to have fun. Meaning, oh, I can play golf every day, I can have a drink at 5 o'clock. And I say, well, this sort of thing, after half a year, it gets very, very old. You're looking, that won't work. People don't realize that there's something in them they should bring out. And that this is the only way for a satisfying life. We should teach it. We don't teach all these things. Did I mention that scientific description of nature must exclude any reference to purpose? When you hear that, you say, yeah, science is objective. It doesn't follow purposes, right? It seems like when you say you follow a purpose, you can bend the laws, but you don't bend the laws of nature. But you know, it's interesting, big mistake, because your body follows the laws of nature. I mean, strictly. But your mind, in your mind you can have a purpose. And the same structure applies to the universe. In the empirical world, we have lawfulness, no purpose, but in its transcendent realm it can follow a purpose. And you have this suspicion that we are part of this purpose. It has a special way to express its purpose in us. You could even say that you are free to choose a purpose for your life. Nobody can stop you by saying, I feel I have a purpose. My purpose is I have to serve people who have little money, to help them. You have a purpose. In that same moment, since everything is wholeness, the universe has a purpose, namely in you. It's that simple. I remember that when I was 14 years old, I drove everybody in my environment crazy because I said, I'm now 14 and I have to understand what is philosophy. And everybody said, what do you mean philosophy? Philosophy is, oh, just leave me alone. Get it. Nobody had an answer, so I started to read Greek philosophers, and you know, it has been a passion all my life. And at one time I began to put together quantum chemistry, quantum physics, and philosophy. You know, I saw these things. It's my potential.